Idaho College and this evening's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Good evening. Our subject tonight is Conquest at Sea. We're going to be discussing the first Pacific Ocean solo rowing journey that was ever made in the history of the human race. Our guest is Mr. Patrick Quesnel. He is from Vaughan, Washington on Puget Sound. This 28-year-old man is going to talk this evening with us about a journey that he took from the Washington coast all the way to Honolulu in a solo rowboat journey. He has attended Tacoma Community College and the University of Washington in Seattle. The National Enquirer on December the 7th, 1976, edited or did an article that was devoted to his voyage. Also, in early March 1977, the nationally syndicated TV panel show To Tell the Truth featured him on their program. Pat, it's a pleasure having you on our program.
It's a pleasure to be here, Tony.
Joining with me this evening in questioning our guest will be two panel members. First is Mary Lou Reed, who holds a bachelor's degree from Mills College in California and did her graduate work in religion at Columbia University in New York City. Welcome, Lou.
Thank you, Tony.
Also a visiting panel member this evening, Mr. Jack Steve, who holds a bachelor's degree in the field of literature from St. Lawrence University and teaches industrial electronics at North Idaho College. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you.
We'll proceed to questions, and the first series will come from Mary Lou Reed.
Well, Pat, you rode 2,700 miles in 111 days to Hawaii, and it's hard to imagine a more difficult way to get to Hawaii. But you did this, I think, 4 years after you first got the idea. Would you go back and tell us how, in 1972, you got this idea for rowing to Hawaii, and just carry on from there? I think we'd like to hear some of your narrative.
Well, actually, in 1972, I left on my first attempt. I was finally successful on my sixth attempt in 1976. But I got the idea in 1969. I attended college for a couple of years, and I dropped out after a couple of years. I was paying my own way, and I was working 40 hours a week, and the grind was just getting to me. So I decided that when I decided what I wanted to do, if it required a degree, I would get it. But I had plenty of time to think when I dropped out of college. And of course, when I was a kid, I grew up dreaming of adventure. I think all kids do. I dreamt about tromping through the jungles of the Amazon and sailing around the world, climbing mountains. When I had this time to think after I got out of college, I just decided, why shouldn't I do something like this right now? Now, while I had my youth, while I had my health, and before I had any financial or marital obligations. I just couldn't think of a good reason not to. So I began to look at, I thought maybe sailing around the South Pacific would be a nice little trip. So I began looking at sailboats. I figured about a 60-foot sailboat would be ample until I looked into the prices of 60-foot sailboats. At any rate, I gradually scaled my plans down to include a 40-foot sailboat, and then I was looking at 20-foot sailboats. And finally, there's more than a grain of truth in this. The rowing was basically all I could afford. Naturally, I'm not going to row all over the South Pacific. I just selected on rowing from the mainland United States to the Hawaiian Islands, quite simply because the Hawaiian Islands are the closest land to mainland United States. As far as actually rowing, when I was a kid, I had heard about a couple of Norwegians, read a little story, I think Saturday Evening Post, about a couple Norwegians that rowed the North Atlantic in 1896, and I guess that's where the original idea was planted. But it wasn't until I got out of college and had some time to think that the idea actually started appealing to me after I had given up on sailing. And I guess rowing, I'm a man that likes challenges, and rowing was a tremendous physical challenge, it would have been to me.
Well, had you had a lot of experience on water or with boats? Was this something, did you grow up very, very close and very comfortable to the ocean?
Yes, I did, Lou. I grew up on Puget Sound. And from the time I was 5 years old, when I was 5, my father promised me that he would build me a boat as soon as I could swim a mile unassisted. So I swam my mile when I was 6, and he built me a boat. And I spent all my childhood rowing boats all around Puget Sound. So I had a lot of experience with boats and a lot of experience in the water. The only thing I didn't have any experience on was the ocean, and I picked that up as I went.
Would you maybe go on just a little bit further to say what happened next? You had the idea, but then how did you carry it out?
Okay, wanting to die of old age, I decided to approach this in a rather cautious manner. First of all, when I selected the Hawaiian Islands, I had to do some research. Variable winds, or I had to check on the winds of the area to see if it was possible. I had to check on the currents. I had to do research to see if it was possible, because of course you can't row against the winds and the currents. So it took me about 6 months of research and studying oceanographic charts to determine that it was possible to row. Since it had never been done before, I determined it was possible to row from mainland United States to the Hawaiian Islands. Then I have to start doing research as to the type of boat I want. A few months more research brought me to the conclusion that I needed a dory, which has been around for 150 years, the basic dory design. I knew I would need a custom-built dory, but the basic design has been around 150 years. They're the boats they used to use for cod fishing off the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. They still do. They're very seaworthy. They can pack an enormous amount of weight, and it takes a minimum amount of power needed to push them, which is ideal if you're going to row across an ocean. So I had to scientifically, I had to go and search out a boat builder, which after seeing several, I would go around to all these wood boat shops and watch them work, and I found one that just kind of an old world craftsman type that really did good work, and I selected him to build the boat. And he agreed to build it. You see, and you see how you just gradually build step by step, and then you concentrate on your supplies, equipment and supplies. Then you concentrate on finding a partner.
How long a time period was this sort of evolution?
3 years. From the time I decided I was going to row till the time I left on my first attempt was 3 years, 69 to 72.
Jack, Steve.
In the process of your deciding on the boat, though, you must have tried many other types, but did you actually physically try these other types of boats, or was it just through pure research that you got?
No, I didn't, Jack. I had determined that a sailboat hull the sailboat and a rowboat are the only two real deep water boats you can get in a small boat. And the sailboat hull had a couple of things which makes it good for sailing, but poor for rowing. Number one thing is in the sailboat is the number of pounds of ballast you have to have, which would make it very difficult. I felt I couldn't carry that much weight and move it economically. So a rowboat was the only real thing that I considered, and a dory is the only really good rowboat there is to take across the ocean.
Also, earlier you indicated that the dory was self-righting. Now you speak about it not having any ballast. Is it just the construction of the boat that makes it unstable upside down?
No, by not any ballast, I mean it didn't have much ballast. Now, a comparable sized sailboat would probably have 5,000 pounds ballast. I had 1,000 pounds of ballast, which was, the boat was built on the basis of a double hull. It was a double-hulled boat. And I stored, the ribs were 6 inches, 2 by 6s. So in between the bottom of the boat and the floorboards on top of the ribs are 6 inches. Now, I filled that space up with 2-gallon polythene jugs of water. And that 75 gallons of water, 8 cases of beer, and a few canned goods that I stuffed down in between the polythene bags were what gave me my 1,000 pounds of ballast. Now, you see, as soon as I drank a gallon jug of water, I'd have to refill it with seawater and put it back down there to keep my ballast. You see, in the 1,000 pounds of ballast, if the boat ever rolls over and goes upside down, if it ever capsizes, you've got all your ballast up on top now, and it's so top-heavy, it just naturally swings back around, and so it's self-righting. I had the misfortune of testing it twice on the first trip.
How about the beer cans? It seemed to me as though if you're looking for extra ballast, maybe you'd use steel cans. Was that a possibility?
Yes, if they made steel cans. Unfortunately, there's one thing I learned on this trip. The aluminum they use in beer cans is not salt waterproof, and they corrode through rather quickly.
Pat, I know that you've already mentioned the fact that you tried in 1972 and that you weren't successful, and when you were in 1976, you have been publicized as the first individual to solo the Pacific in a rowboat. But I understand in the 72 trip you did not take that path. You had a partner, And I also understand that you had 3 before the trip ended. Would you give us the history behind that, how you selected those individuals and what went wrong?
Well, I selected them through, there were only 3 friends of mine that I felt were up to a trip like that. And this was back in the days when you had to worry about the draft. And the first 2 friends, the Army beat me to them. And the 3rd friend told me I was crazy. So I finally selected my partner through the University of Washington Daily, placing an ad there. And I could write a book on my search for partners alone, but suffice it to say that I eventually found a partner to my liking, and Pete, 21-year-old mountain climber, and we left. Now, Pete was a very good partner, but unfortunately we had the misfortune of capsizing off the Oregon coast during a gale. And he injured his knee, and I had to bring him into San Francisco. At San Francisco, I picked up a second partner. We were out 3 days, and we ran into a storm. And after the storm was over, this second partner decided that he wanted to go back home. So I rode him into Half Moon Bay, 20 miles south of San Francisco. And in Half Moon Bay, I picked up partner number 3, who was a very good partner. 29-year-old truck driver, 6'4", 220. Those oars were like matchsticks in his hands. But I thought I really had it made with him. But 3 days off the coast, he developed a kidney infection. The only drug we had was penicillin, and he was allergic to penicillin. So my luck was holding. At any rate, I had to put out a SOS. We were within sight of land. The Coast Guard sent a cutter out, picked him up. And from that point, I continued on alone. And after 3 months, I got capsized by a very freak wave, and most of my equipment and supplies were destroyed. So I had to put out an SOS, and the Coast Guard fortunately had a weather station, a vessel permanently stationed there, based in Seattle. Their tour of duty was just up, and they just picked me up in the boat. They were going back to Seattle anyway, and just took me right back on into Seattle. And so then I was determined, and I decided I was going to do it again. I was going to succeed. I did not want to be known, Tony, as the guy that almost rode to Honolulu. So I went about it much more methodically. I knew everything I needed to know now with my ocean experience. And 4 years later, in 1976, I did it. I left July 14th and arrived November 2nd, 111 days. But the main thing I did differently on this trip was I didn't take a partner. Now, I don't like being alone, but I knew I could take it. I knew the boat could take it. I had the finest equipment and supplies in the world. Why take along a question mark? That was the only way I could guarantee that I would make it.
Now, actually, you found that you had particular difficulties with the people you took, but only by reason of, well, essentially, injuries or such. But had you thought through the possibility, and I'm sure you had an idea that it would take a long time when you first started, about just general incompatibility when you were out there 50 days? And
well, I can get along with virtually anyone, regardless of who it is. You know, you have to get along. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I mean, your life depends on your partner, and you have to be able to trust him 110%, and he has to be able to trust you 110%. So there wasn't any problem there. One of my, now Pete had long hair and was into more of the avant-garde type thinking. My second partner, Steve, was a 21-year-old ex-Marine Corps veteran, very much into the Marine Corps philosophy, and then the other one was a 29-year-old truck driver, and I got along great with all of them.
now that you made the decision, though, or after you made the decision to go alone, it still had to be a question of mental attitude. How did you decide that? How did you pin that down? Or was it a big factor?
Yes, it was a big factor. Your number one preparation for the trip are emotional. You can't let the trip overwhelm you. You have to take it one day at a time. Rowing 2,700 miles, it was like walking 2,700 miles. If you're going to say, I'm going to walk from Coeur d'Alene to New York City, if you think of the trip as a whole, it'll overwhelm you. But if you can think of it as just a few miles at a day, if you can think of it as, say, 20 miles a day, in 100 days you walk 2,000 miles. So you have to just kind of set little daily or weekly goals. You can't look at the trip as a whole, or it'll tend to overwhelm you. You have to set your brain up, set your mind up like a computer. It has to be to the point where your body will do whatever your mind tells it to. It's easy to say this, but it's another thing to think about what it means. That means that when your body does whatever your mind tells it to, let's say you have an infection in your foot, you get gangrene, you're going to have to be able to at least try to amputate your own foot. And I mean, when your brain tells your hand to take the knife or the scalpel and go to work, it's going to have to do it, maybe with the aid of a little spirits or whatever, but you have to have that kind of discipline before you leave, or you're not going to make it.
Were you always confident that you would make it through? Was this something that you were very sure of in your own mind?
Yes, I wanted to die of old age. I still do, by the way.
Well,
and I decided that if in my own mind I felt there was a 5% chance of me not making it, I wouldn't have gone. I was very, very self-confident, but it wasn't a brash, cocky, arrogant type of self-confidence. It's a self-confidence that comes from knowing what you're doing and being well prepared. It's like, everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses. I'm a human being like everyone else. Water happens to be my own element. But if were I to try mountain climbing, I'd be a total failure because I'm afraid of heights.
Well, you were very methodical about this then, but how did your family and friends feel about it? I'm sort of identifying with your mother. I think that this would be a very, very difficult thing for those who are close to you to let you go. How did you deal with that? How did you prepare them?
Well, my folks didn't worry that much. Really, why should they? It was their idea, this whole trip. No, no, but my folks and my friends they know me fairly well. They have a fairly deep belief in me also. They know that for my entire life I've never bitten off more than I could chew. And they know that when I'm laying my life on the line, I'm a fairly cautious individual. At first I imagine they were worried, and of course fathers tend to be proud and mothers tend to worry. And so I imagine that my mom worried most of the trip. They both did, I know. But the fact that they were in on this from the beginning, and they had seen these tremendous preparations that I had gone through to get into the frame of mind and also to equip the boat. Seeing the preparations that I'd gone through, they didn't worry as much as they had been if I would just fly by nighter that took off in the middle of some night.
Well, and you did have some sort of system of getting in touch with them through the Coast Guard. Is that right? That whenever you ran into someone, you tried to get the message back.
Right. When I stopped the freighter, I'd have them notify the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard would call up my folks, and of course they'd make a press release, and so people would be able to keep in touch with me. On this second trip, I was only able to do that twice in 111 days.
Now, you indicated that the first trip, when you ran into the difficulty off Hawaii and got the Coast Guard there, but were you able to get in contact other than just emergency SOS?
No, Jack. All I had for an emergency SOS radio was just the airplane homing beacon, the locator distress signal that the light planes carry.
In other words, you were just sort of lucky that they were able to pick you up, or would you expect to have that?
Well, you'd expect, because you see, the Western Pacific is crisscrossed with airplanes, and all commercial airliners monitor or are supposed to monitor this aircraft emergency distress signal. As a matter of fact, when it was picked up on the first trip, it was picked up by a Qantas jet. And of course, an aircraft distress transmitter transmits on the aircraft distress frequency. So the Qantas jet radioed down to the Coast Guard vessel Wachusett, which is 50 miles away, radioed down and there's an airplane down in your area. It's up 50 miles away from you. And the Coast Guard, they knew that I was in the area. They said, oh no, they said, that's not an airplane. And the guy in the jet, the pilot, we were 1,000 miles from land. The pilot said, well, what is it? He says, oh, that's a rowboat. And there was just a dead silence in the airplane for about 10 seconds, and then barely audible, you could hear it come over. You gotta be kidding.
How does the Coast Guard feel about fellows who decide to row across the ocean? Were they very friendly, or do they treat you as kind of a problem and a nuisance?
Not really either one. Now, the Coast Guard, of course, they're in the business of saving lives, and they cannot and they should not condone a trip like this. The way they did it with me, they did everything in their power to talk me out of going. But when I made up my mind, I was just determined to go, and they knew I was determined. And they have a law now where they can stop people if they want to. They can forbid a boat to leave port if they feel it's unsafe. But to their credit, they allowed me to leave. They apparently felt that I was well enough prepared, and I had enough of a chance of success, where they didn't have to, it wasn't a suicide thing, so they let me go.
To get back to the final trip, the one that you finally became a winner instead of a 5-time loser, as you indicated, it still is really incredible to me that a 22-foot boat, and really a 22-foot rowboat, dory or not, is still a hunk of weight. How much did it weigh? Loaded?
The boat empty was about 1,500 pounds. With myself and all the equipment and supplies, it was probably, the whole package was close to 4,000, 2 tons.
To push 2 ton, or pull, I guess you can say that, pull 2 tons of boat into some of those waters is still an incredible bit of business. What would happen when you had headwinds? Could you do anything at all during headwinds, or you just have to slack off?
I had a sea anchor, which is a large conical canvas bag attached to 175 feet of 5/8 nylon line. I would attach the other end of this line to the bow of the boat, so that whenever a storm came up or headwinds, the boat would drift sideways until the 175 feet of line came taut, and then it would swing the bow of the boat into the seas. That would keep me from pitch poling or capsizing during the storms. And also during the headwinds, it would slow my backwards drift. Because, like you said, 2 tons of boat, you cannot row against the wind or the waves. You cannot punch into 10 or 15-foot waves and expect to make any progress. So the headwinds come along 2, 3, 4, 5 days, however long you last. You just put the sea anchor out and don't start rowing again until the wind changes. You can row beam on in either direction to the wind, or any part running before it, but you can't go into it. In other words, if the wind is blowing from the north, you can row due east or due west, or any point south of that in a 180-degree half a circle, but you cannot row or even quarter into the wind.
You indicated earlier, you mentioned that you had a rudder, and you were telling me about the way in which you used that rudder for a rowboat. Not that this should be, well, I suppose it is part of the business of those that will come after. They'll find out how you did it, but the way in which you canted that rudder or had it at a particular angle so that you could pull straight on the oars to counter the effect of the waves, it was an interesting business.
Right. Yes, you would, naturally a boat without a rudder, you have your choice of either running directly before the waves or directly beam on in either direction. Now if you want to row at an angle to the waves, the waves are going to tend to blow you, the wind and waves are going to tend to blow you beam on sideways. So you adjust the rudder is fixed, it's not movable. You adjust the rudder and tie it off to where it counteracts the effect of the waves. Therefore, you can row with an equal pull on each oar. It's another one of those little things you pick up. You can still make it without a rudder, but it'd take you a while, quite a bit longer, because you wouldn't be able to keep as accurate a course.
Pat, I think there is another area that would be of great interest to our viewers, and that is, you told the students this morning some of the problems that you had on the trip in relation to the weather, and also I believe you had a problem with a shark at one time and birds. I think if you take 3 or 4 of these stories and tell us what happened, I think it would be of interest that there were some great hardships or problems that you faced, even in the successful trip in 1976.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's not easy. There's no picnic to row across the ocean, Tony. I'd like to impress that upon anyone that wants to try it. I'll do everything I can to talk you out of it. The thing is, just for physical hardships, you're cold. You're drenched to the bone for months at a time. You're cold. I mean, so cold your teeth chatter. You know, that your teeth chatter till your jaws go numb. In the first trip, there were times when in order to go to sleep, I would have to put something in my mouth, vinyl, plastic, cardboard, whatever I could find, because the jaws clacking together with the cold would keep you awake and keep you from getting to sleep. There were times when you have to, even on a regular night, I slept by just curling up in a tight little ball on the floor. It was too cold to stretch out. You had to curl up in a very tight little ball to conserve your body heat. You had to do this for months on end. The fact that you're drenched. Well, the thing is, the ocean is about 20 degrees colder than what it is on the land. In other words, if it's 70 degrees on land, it's 50 degrees 20 miles off the coast. Plus the fact that there's a 20-knot wind blowing, which gives you a nice chill factor. And the water, that water you're being drenched with all the time is 50 degrees. So there's a lot of problem with exposure And it's just the physical hardships. You have to get yourself used to physical hardships like that. Another thing is salt water sores. Very painful little boils that form with the salt water chafing on your clothes. And you just, and the thing is, it chafes. The only relief is to lie quietly. But you can't do that if you're rowing. You have to just sit there and row and grit your teeth. And there were some days when I would have to, the way I would keep going is that I would make myself row for 5 minutes. And I'd say in 5 minutes, I would take, I'm going to lay down and relax. You know, I'm not going to move because the salt water sores, each stroke of the oars, it really hurt. Very painful. And after I'd lasted that 5 minutes, I said, well, I can last another 5 minutes. And I would last another 5 minutes. And then I'd last another 5 minutes. And I'd do that all day long. And finally, toward the end, it'd really get bad. You know, we were lasting minute by minute, and then finally you quit because you can't take it anymore. But then you're up again next morning rowing. You just have to, you have to learn to live with pain all the time. I mean, 24 hours a day. And that's, the trip has taught me, has given me a great deal of respect for people that have to live their lives in daily pain. People with diseases or something that drugs can't help. And someone that has to live with pain every day of their life, that's really, my heart goes out to them. Because I remember one day I put my hand on my face, and it was hard. It was solid. It was just, my face was taut, you know, days on end. It was just, all the muscles were taut in it, just from the pain. And you go through a few weeks of that, and you know, sometimes I felt, the trip like this is a masochist dream vacation. That's what I'm trying to say. So physically, it's no picnic.
Before we return to the panel, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for me to interrupt to point out to you who have joined in late that our guest is Mr. Patrick Quesnel, who is the first person to solo in a rowboat across the Pacific Ocean from the West Coast to Honolulu. We'll return to the panel in the first series of questions from Mary Lou Reed.
Well, what about sleep? You said you slept rolled up in a tight little ball. Were you able to get enough sleep? I guess what I'm leading to is that you have said, and our audience doesn't know yet, but that you really did not have any hallucinations. And I think it would be interesting to try and find out, you know, what you think the cause of hallucinations are in a situation like that. Is it if a person doesn't get enough sleep, or anyway? Why don't you say what your mental attitude was in relationship to rest?
Okay, I've discovered one thing too. And that if you're really, really tired, you can sleep in any kind of conditions. When your body needs sleep, it'll put you to sleep whether you want to go or not. As far as the mental attitude is concerned, I've found that as far as hallucinations are concerned, your mind demands and requires stimuli. It has to have it. And now this is a personal theory. I suppose it might not stand up in any scientific court of law, but the way I feel is that a person that is deprived of these stimuli, we have stimuli, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands every single day, stimuli, seeing, hearing, everything. But out in the ocean, where you're looking at the same thing and you're not hearing anything, my theory is that when the brain runs out of stimulus, for over any long period of time, it starts inventing its own, and that, I think, is where you get hallucination. You fight hallucinations by. I had several hallucinatory dreams on the first trip. They were just very grotesque, morbid dreams, all in living color, just really, you know. And I would wake up, and they were so grotesque that I knew that it was a dream, and yet they were so realistic that I had to lie awake for 15 minutes after I woke up in the morning, just convincing myself that it hadn't really happened. But what you have to do, you realize the problem ahead of time, and you have to invent all these stimulus. During the day, I used to play little mathematical games with my mind, do this long division and all these calculations carried out in my head. And I had a little AM/FM waterproof radio, which I listened to at night all the way across. I could pick up stations at night, even 1,000 miles from land. And the news and music was able to provide me enough stimulus at night. That plus the little mental games that I played during the day sometimes, where hallucinating wasn't really a problem in the second trip.
Well, you kept a log all along.
Yes.
every day. And after you read it, after you arrived in Hawaii, could you tell any differences in your own performance from day to day? Were there days where your log would sort of reveal that maybe you were a little bit more down or maybe more tired, that perhaps you were not as stable as you perhaps thought you were?
Oh yes, yeah. I could look back and see that in my log, but my ups and downs, my hills and valleys, if you will. My hills weren't that high and my valleys weren't that low. I wanted to stay at as even a keel as possible throughout the entire trip. In other words, I did not want to get so sky high that I would be cocky. I didn't want to get overconfident. I didn't want to get so low that I got depressed, because then when your morale goes down, you tend to make mistakes and get a little more sloppy in your thinking. So whenever I felt that I was getting too high or too cocky, I would always take myself down a few pegs mentally. Whenever I felt I was getting too low, I would work to build myself back up. You know, I would maybe stop the rowing and open a nice big canned chicken and have a nice big orgy, chicken orgy. But basically, I tried to stay at an even keel.
Did you find you were talking to yourself?
Oh yes, you talk to yourself.
You talk to yourself out loud?
Oh yes, and you answer yourself, and you talk to the birds and talk to the sharks. I remember once I threw a little scrap over, and the sharks would fight over among themselves and snap it up, and finally, and I would stand there and give the sharks long lectures on table etiquette, and just you do these things just to keep your mind active, to keep it. I mean, there wasn't anyone I was trying to impress, obviously, with my little witticisms, but you do it just to kind of keep yourself together.
I would suspect that really is a good part of how you were able to do this. Any man that would go across the Pacific in that manner, if he didn't have a sense of humor, he would die in a hurry.
Oh yes, you know, it's funny, Jack. I was thinking about. Well, I would have done it, but the time was. You know how things are with a trip like this or vacation or anything. You're always rushing around at the last minute, and I was rushing around at the last minute too. But what I wanted to do was get a. You know, I know that a lot of people who were coming down to see me leave because they read about it in the paper or something. They probably just wanted to come and see what a real live nut was like. So I wanted to really put on a good show for them. I wanted to get dressed up in a Donald Duck suit or something and waddle down to the boat and take off, or a Superman or something like that. I didn't have time to do that, but something like that would have been right up my alley, Jack.
Agreed.
As long as we're probing your emotions, obviously these gales were the greatest obstacles that you ran into. You might want to describe them more, but as I understand it, you had one where you were there for 5 days without moving. How about fear? Did you find yourself amazingly calm and kind of objective, or weren't you scared?
Yes, I was amazingly calm and amazingly terrified simultaneously. I've been accused of not having a nerve in my body, but that's, of course, a lie. My partners would think I was weird because during a storm, instead of sitting there and worrying or something or looking out at the waves, I would just curl up in a little ball and go to sleep. But I mean, I did that scientifically. I was afraid, and I was afraid of dying. And that's why I wanted to, if any emergency came up, I wanted to be fully rested and ready to react immediately. I didn't want to sit there and worry. It doesn't do any good to worry about the waves. So I was afraid all the way across, every single day. And that's what I mean about I wanted to keep a certain amount of fear because it keeps you on edge. And if you lose your fear, then when you get cocky and something can go wrong. Or if you get too much fear, it has a paralyzing effect. So I had little games I would play if I was starting to lose my fear, if I got too afraid, to kind of keep this fear at a steady level.
Tell us your scariest story. Was it when you left the boat left you?
Yes, I would say on my first trip, I was alone and the boat capsized, throwing me out of the boat. And I came down about 30 feet away from the boat. And of course I couldn't swim with my foul weather gear on. But fortunately, there was so much debris floating in the water, I grabbed a seat as it floated by and put it under one arm and an oar under the other arm, made my way back to the boat and bailed it out. But that's the number one danger, becoming separated from the boat. Now, it's funny the way my mind would work. When the boat capsized, the very first thing, it would just flash through my mind. You know, I remember my very thought. It flashed through my mind, you know, oh no, I'll never see any of my friends again. You know, I figured that death thing flashes through. But just as quickly, I guess that's just, that flashes through your mind while my brain was getting engaged, just a split second, maybe in a blinking of an eye, that would flash and be gone, and that would be just the time, I guess, that it would take for the brain to kick in and tell you exactly what to do. And so that whenever during an emergency, it always flash. The death would flash right there, and from then on, for some reason, just instinctively, I'd automatically do the right thing.
Having been separated once, though, wouldn't that be enough to have you locked onto that boat with some safety harness or something like that? Did you use safety harness?
I had a safety harness and a lifeline, but the problem with that is that it gets in your way when you're rowing. When you bring the oars back at the end of the stroke, they always manage to hook into one of the straps one way or another, and it pulls you forward and throws you out of the seat. And also, you're always forever getting tangled up in it. I finally came to the conclusion that with only one or two exceptions in the trip, I didn't wear them because they were too much of a nuisance. When an emergency happens and you have to act in a split second, you don't want to be all tangled up in your safety line.
Some boats trail a line with a float or something like that afterwards, so that after the boat, so that if they get thrown off, they might have a way to get to it. Did you do anything like that?
No, that's common among sailboats, Jack, but I didn't need it because if I fell overboard, my boat wasn't going to sail away and leave me. I mean, if I fell overboard, I just reach up and grab the boat. It's got no more power.
Louis.
How about the interesting encounter with the Russians? Would you retell that story of running into a Russian fishing boat?
Sure, Lou. About 10 days out of La Push, on my second trip in 1976, I thought it was a freighter at first, but it was a Russian fishing vessel as I got closer, a big fishing trawler. It wasn't fishing, it was running, probably doing 8 or 10 knots, running down the coast. And they saw me, and they made a little jog out of their way to pass right alongside me. I thought, great. Now, they'll stop. I'll be able to relay my position to the Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard, of course, will give a press release and call my folks, and so everyone will know that I'm fine. That was about 10 days after I got off. I wanted everyone to know that I got off the beach okay. So I thought, great. So they came by me, but they didn't even stop. They kept going, full bore. And as they went by me, 3 or 4 of the crewmen came on deck and lined the rail and looked down at me as they were going by. They were only about 40 feet away. And they all started shaking their fists at me and yelling at me in Russian. I assume it was Russian. It could have been Bulgarian or Polish. I don't know. But I couldn't understand it because I had a American flag decal on the boat, and everyone could see what nationality I was. And they knew I wouldn't be able to understand what they were saying. Here they were there. Now, for some reason, they were shaking their fist at me and yelling. And here I was expecting them to stop, and be real kind and report my position to the Coast Guard. So the whole thing, it irritated me no end, and I lost my temper. And I stood up and I shook my fist back at them and I started yelling back at them. And I spent a couple winters as a logger, and I have been billed as a colorful speaker, and I can be a very colorful speaker on occasion. But at any rate, I gave them some of my best. And all of a sudden, the boat slowed down and stopped, and started backing up toward me. And I thought, uh-oh, someone on board that boat understands English. I'm in big trouble now. So they came right alongside, and they came to a stop. Of course, by this time, I'm sit down, and I'm pretending like nothing ever happened. And in a very broken English, a very heavily accented voice comes over the PA system, which I cranked up, and said, "I am very sorry. We were unable to understand what you were saying. Could you repeat it, please?" And I got up and I said, yes. I was just saying that I didn't need any assistance whatsoever. Thank you very much for stopping. And they sped off.
Jack C.
Incredible. It seems surprising to me that you're so small. I can't imagine somehow a person that having rowed across the Pacific as you did, 111 days, should come back with shoulders of iron and 4 foot broad and such. How come?
Well, first of all, your body structure is determined more or less at birth, and some people are just naturally muscular and others aren't. I'm not. And when I came into Honolulu, naturally I had a nice set of shoulders and a fairly decent set of biceps and everything. But to me, that isn't, I'm not the kind of guy that goes around a beach and kicks sand in people's faces. I mean, muscles aren't that big of a deal to me, so I don't spend a lot of time pumping iron or anything, so naturally I lost it after about 2 months after I came back. But for long-distance rowing, most of it is done with your back. You're leaning way forward and going way back. It's very little with your arms. You want to get your entire body into the rowing effort. So you're not, rowing as an exercise is no more strenuous than walking. Rowing 2,700 miles is like walking 2,700 miles. If you...
Is that an article of faith? Can we take that as gospel?
Take it as gospel, right. If you were to walk from 2,700 miles, I don't know, however far that is, say from here to Miami or whatever, when you arrive in Miami, your legs wouldn't be 14 feet thick or anything. It's, in fact, in some cases, they might be a little more slender, but they'd be very muscular. But you don't use all that extra weight. That's why even when I came in, my arms weren't that big around.
How did you feel when you got there? When you first made your landfall after all that time?
It was, when I first saw land, after 110 days, I cried for 2 hours. It was actually about 107 days. I first sighted the big island of Hawaii. I passed about 50 miles north of it. But, after 7 years of your life has gone into something, it's incredible. And the feeling I felt as I finally rode into Honolulu, after 7 years of my life and planning and preparation and all that I had gone through, it was finally within my grasp. It was just an absolute incredible, very deep feeling of satisfaction. And that's the only real reward I carry around with me for the rest of my life. I imagine for someone to climb Mount Everest, it's the same feeling that you would get standing on top of Mount Everest, those few glorious moments while you were on top. And that's my real reward. I'll carry it around with me for the rest of my life, and no one can ever take it away from me.
How about a sense of loss? Did you also feel that?
Yes, exactly. Very good. You see, 7 years of my life, I never looked beyond Honolulu. For 7 years of my life, I arrived in Honolulu.
Yeah.
That was my goal. Yeah. And all of a sudden, I had no more goals, no more challenges, and I was lost for about 2 or 3 weeks. People couldn't understand. I would just sit around. I came back at the end of it, and I would just sit around and do nothing all day long. And I had to find another goal.
Your personal war was over.
Right, but everyone has to have a goal. They have to have someone they're working for, or working toward, even if it's just a weekly paycheck. They have to have goals. And so I decided to write a book on the trip, and that was my next goal, and that keeps me going now, in between commercial fishing. I commercial fish in the summer, so.
Something else that I think we should bring up, Pat, that you mentioned to the students this morning, and that is during your stay on the ocean for 111 days, that certainly was solitude, and you were not with other people. And I thought you gave a very interesting address concerning this topic, or you made comments concerning what happened to you mentally during this time, and how did you perceive the whole purpose of life, or how did you relate to your friends while you were away from them?
Well, of course, it helps a great deal to have a lot of friends that are rooting for you. That emotional support is really important, and knowing my folks were praying for me every night, and members of my church were I know they were praying for me every night. It really helps. Now, when you're going through the storm in the nights when it's pitch black and there's 30-foot breakers roaring, just a constant roaring around you at all times, maybe once every 20 minutes or a half hour, one will just break over and completely bury the boat, but somehow you pop out on the other side. I can see where it could drive a person off his rocker. But the fact that even while these breakers are roaring all around you 1,000 miles from nowhere, knowing that at that very moment there are probably people back home praying for you, it kind of gives you a lift, and it helps you make it through the night. Nights are by far the worst time, nights during the gales.
You speak about your church. Did a belief in God help you? Did you feel?
Oh yes, immensely, right. It's like the old saying, there's no atheists in foxholes. I can't see that there'd be any atheists in a situation like this, because the ocean, the magnificence of the ocean, or the awesome power of these waves, it's just, well, I don't know. I can never really understand atheists, because I can look up at the sky and on a dark night and see, you know, see a myriad of stars and the infinite beauty of the universe, and to me, I look up at something like that. This might seem like a very simplistic approach, but I don't know, it just seems too wonderful to have happened by accident.
What did you think about, really, daily, hour by hour, hour by hour? Was your mind with exactly what you were doing each moment, or did it wander? Were you backpacking somewhere else, or visiting friends, or?
No, I found that, now during the trip, here on dry land, we have a tremendous, we have millions of things going through our mind all the time. They're not even, you're not even conscious of them, but they're back there, they're cluttering up your mind. Things like, oh, you know, news, sports, television, radio, the weather, interpersonal relationships, money. There's 1,001 different things in your mind all the time. And it seems like on dry land, I know, I never have seemed to be able to really concentrate my mind on any one thing really in depth. Now, the first 3 weeks when you get out in the ocean, of course, the second you get out in the ocean, that's gone immediately. You have no more, you know, I took care of all my financial things before I left. And your mind, it still takes about 3 weeks for all this to kick out of your mind. You know, all these little things to work their way out of your mind. And after about a month of absolute solitude, you see, now this was a benevolent type of solitude. This wasn't a harsh solitude like solitary confinement in some POW camp. This was a benevolent solitude. I had plenty to eat and drink and fresh air, exercise, everything. But I found that my mind would just slowly kick back, and it would become very deep and very tranquil. My mind would be very alert, but it was almost an awesome thing, very deep and very tranquil, and it was like I could focus the entire power of my mind on. Things became so clear, at least the issues, not necessarily answers, but everything was so clear. I could look back on my life and I could just see, just like I was in third person, you know. I could look back on all my life, I could see all the decisions I made, which ones were good, which ones weren't. I could look back on all the hundreds of friends and acquaintances I had. I could see just exactly, you know, who were my real friends, which ones were using me, which ones were fair weather friends. Things that weren't clear to me on dry land, because I never really, I guess, was able to concentrate enough where those things would stand out. Like I say, it was a very, very awesome experience.
Now, I might steal a little thunder from you, because I know that you specifically said that you won't be doing it again. So if I ask the question, I know what the answer is. I think that you indicated that you'd made a promise never to put an oar in your hand again, and
right.
You've lived up to it. But this business of having the mind go into low gear and being away, taking 3 weeks in order to get yourself to that state, is it a state that you'd like to get back to?
Yes, but it's not a state that you'd like to live in, because man is a social creature by nature. No man is an island, and though the emotional support of friends is something that everyone has to have. It's nice once in a while. Now, I like to be alone off and on, but basically I like people. I like to be around people. I really get off on people. But every 6 or 7 months or whatever, I like to get off by myself for a while. Whether I'm a great backpacker. I love backpacking, and I'll take a backpack somewhere, say in Olympics, where I can be gone for a week at a time, preferably without seeing anyone, and just have time to collect your thoughts and think things out. And you come back, it's almost kind of a refreshing experience. I've never been into any Eastern religion or anything like that, but the way the descriptions I've heard of some of the trances these people get into, it's almost like that. But your mind is alert all the time. But it just kind of gives you time to collect your thoughts.
Mary Lou Reed.
Well, the students this morning at North Idaho College were very, very receptive, both to your stories and to really what your message was, and the message that you can do anything you want to if you just persevere. As you're going around to different campuses, what do you see the students looking for? Are they looking for this kind of personal inspiration? Is this what they respond to? Do they respond to it because it was a difficult ordeal and man could survive it, or because they really are wanting to be told that they can achieve their goals?
I'll have a very difficult time answering that, Lou, because maybe I'm too close to it to really, understand how many responded or how deeply they responded, and different people tend to take things different ways. It was very very, you know, I go and I give my presentation, and I'm really don't consider myself much of a judge as to how the students respond and what way they do. But basically, yes, that is my message, if you want to call it that. But the people can do anything they want to do. Now, I kind of felt like I wanted to row across an ocean. But rather than spend the rest of my life just dreaming about it or wondering, now, I wonder if I could have done that or not, I just wasn't satisfied with the dreaming. I had to do it. I had to go out and I had to experience it for myself. And I just sat down methodically and worked about and thought about doing it. And people, they seem afraid to act like that. They seem afraid, whether it's a fear of failure or what, but they have these things they want to do. Well, everyone, you have a lot of frustrated writers, for one thing, in this world. They want to be novelists, and they're working at some other job. But rather than go to symposiums and try to actually buckle down and learn the skill of writing and give it a try at least, they just sit there and dream about it instead of doing anything to make their dreams come true, and I can't really understand that.
Can you contrast the students you're seeing now with the students that were there during your period? You're really still very close to it, but it was the Vietnam era. Do you feel that there was anything that had to do with that, the frustrations of the Vietnam era, that really gave you a push to say, look, I'm going to do what I want to do?
Not really, no. And I found that young people, and I consider myself to be a young person, are the same everywhere, and they've been the same, I should say we've been the same all down through history. When I was several years ago, when I was at the University of Washington, I remember I was very idealistic. I was very much into causes, you know. I wanted causes, and I guess a cause and a challenge, it's the same thing. But you need a challenge. You need a cause. You need to have something that you can believe in, something you can devote yourself to, something you can work toward. When I was going to college, I was involved in marches for well, the big thing then in the late '60s was the black people, and you know, there was a lot of marches. They don't have too many marches now, but those were big things back in the '60s, and I took part in them. Vietnam, you know, looking back on it now, those marches I don't think did one bit of good, really. But it was at the time I really felt that they were you know, the causes are still there, but as far as did the marches advance the cause, I don't think so. But it was good just to get together with a bunch of other people that had the same cause and just march together. It was a good feeling.
Jack, Steve.
What's the next great adventure?
I'm getting married in February, Jack. That should keep me busy for the next 3 or 4 years or so. But by occupation, I consider myself to be a commercial fisherman. And I'm going to build a 45-foot commercial fishing boat to replace the 28-footer that I'm fishing now. It'll be a basic dory design. And I'm going to make it in as a motor sailor. And this is in the far distant future, 4, 5, 6 years from now, that I'll get it built and everything. But if I feel like it, perhaps I could fish. I'm leaving I'm leaving all the doors open right now, but perhaps I could fish I'll see how my wife likes sailing, see if she gets seasick. I could perhaps fish for 3 months and maybe spend, once in a while, just take off and spend 9 months wherever I felt like it. With a 45-foot motor sailor, in 2 weeks, I could be down through the Panama Canal and spend 7 or 8 months in the Caribbean and come back in time to go fishing next year. Or I could spend it in the South Pacific. But that's in the far distant future. For right now, I'm going to get married and settle down and get a fishing boat. Then I've got to get the boat paid off. So this is in the future.
The 45-footer, I suppose, is large enough so that, again, you won't be forced to use an oar on it.
No, I'm not even going to put any oar locks on that boat whatsoever. And that's really the way to do it. If you want to go see the South Pacific and you want to do it on your own, get a sailboat down the road. Let the wind do the work. Have a nice, warm, dry cabin you can crawl into when weather gets bad. Take along company, friends. This is the way to do it, not the Danish way. I'm part Danish.
Lou.
We have just a couple minutes left. Maybe you could finish with the story of what it's like to have a flying squid come through the air at you.
Oh, yeah. So flying fish and flying squid are things you have to watch out for. They travel about 15 miles an hour, and The squid, of course, are only about 14 inches long, but still, if you have 14-inch long squid slap you in the face at 15 miles an hour, it's a very uncomfortable thing. And once a squid, even when I was sleeping, a squid landed on the seat right above my head, and of course they jettison all their ink and really make a mess out of your cockpit. And he slid back and forth in this pool of ink on the seat and slid off the edge, fell onto my face, and really with his tentacles, he grabbed on. He wanted to hang on. He didn't want to fall off any more cliffs. So that really got my attention in a hurry, and I pulled him off my face and threw him overboard. But I didn't get any sleep for the rest of that night. Little things like that. Now they're funny in retrospect, but while they're happening, I can assure you they're anything but funny.
Was the shark funny?
The shark I killed? No, that was a pretty deadly business. The thing is, I lassoed a shark and was able to tie him off with his tail to one end of the boat and the head to the other end of the boat, so I was able to finally control him.
Oh, man in the sea, yeah.
But no, while that's going on, you're pretty involved. That's a pretty deadly business. You slip and fall in the water, you can lose an arm in a hurry.
Jack, Steve.
Well, as I look back on my contact with you, I think it's fair to understand that, for me to report that you started out by being the nut that went across the Pacific. But it sounds to me as though you got your feet on the ground and your eyes
Sure.
pretty clear.
Right.
And
it's been
very rewarding.
You can't let what other people think of you affect really what you do. I'm not advocating by breaking laws or anything, but I could care less what people think of me, really. What's important to me is what I think of myself and what my friends think of me. What the general public thinks of me at large, it doesn't really make much difference. I'm enjoying myself, I'm having a ball, I'm doing exactly what I want to do with my life, and I'm a very happy person. If I tried to conform to someone else's view of what a happy, normal person should be like and should do, I'd be unhappy. I'd much rather be happy and let everyone else think I'm a nut.
On that positive note, ladies and gentlemen, I'll have to bring our program to a conclusion. On behalf of all of our staff, Pat, it's been a pleasure having you on our program, and thank you very much.
It was a pleasure to be here, Tony.
Also, I want to express my appreciation to the panel for their outstanding questions. May I invite you to be with us again next week on this same station at the same time, when again we'll be discussing a significant issue or topic of our times. This is your moderator, Tony Stewart, wishing you a good evening.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.